Good morning, everyone, and welcome to ConstructionCast. As you all start to trickle in, just wanted to welcome our guest this morning. This morning, we're going to be talking about adjudication and asking the question, is it fit for purpose? Lots of people have opinions on adjudication. Some of you love it, some of you hate it. Some of you think it could work better if we get it right. So to join us this morning, we've got Bill Bordill of Decipher. He's a director at Decipher, a D-Simone company. He's an experienced quantum expert and dispute resolver. He has 35 years experience in the construction and engineering industries. He's also a construction adjudicator, a member of the adjudication panel of several appointing bodies, including the RICS President's Panel of Adjudicators. And secondly, we have Lena Barnes, who's a senior associate at Devonshire's. Lena specialises in construction dispute resolution at Devonshire's. She's worked with employers, developers, contractors, and has experience advising clients using most major forms of construction contracts. Lena graduated from King's College. She was called to the bar in 2012 before dual qualifying as a solicitor, and she's currently undertaking the RICS adjudicator training. So we're going to get the two views here from a current adjudicator and someone who's going through the process, and both have worked as party reps and on that side of adjudication. So lots of experience here in the room. As always, the chat box is open if you want to share any questions for our guests. We'll put those to them at the end. So adjudication, lots of the complaints we get about it, things like the quality of adjudicators, if it's, if the process is too short for the complexity of the disputes we're covering. Sometimes people think it's rough justice, and that's something that people like, and that's something that other people don't like. Starting with the first kind of issue that comes up a lot, the quality of adjudicators. Is it a bit of a roll of the dice if you're choosing an adjudicator? You get given an adjudicator. Are adjudicators, do they have the quality training that they need? Bill, when it comes to training adjudicators, what can we do to improve the quality of training?
Well, that's an interesting question. I guess that kind of presupposes that the quality isn't good enough, and I actually think it is. So I guess I can only talk about my own training, and that was with the CIARB. I did the CIARB diploma. I have attended one or two of the modules of the RICS diploma, and that now is online. I think the CIARB course is now online, and that's a big difference. When I did my training, it was pre-COVID, so it was all face-to-face, and that meant that, I mean, my experience was that there was about 6 to 8 people sat in the room with a trainer who was an experienced adjudicator, and that meant you had quite an intense day, or sometimes 2-day sessions, where we'd literally be sat around the table discussing things. I remember one day the trainer turned up and said, "Have you all read the notes? Has anybody got any questions?" The answer was yes, we've read the notes, we don't have any questions. So he basically put all the notes to one side, and we spent 2 days just discussing practical aspects and practical issues with adjudication. So it meant that you really had a deep dive. You weren't swimming on the surface. It was a real deep dive. Also, the course was much longer. It took me 10 years to go from thinking about joining the training to actually getting on to the RICS President's Panel. And I think I spent 6 years of that actually in the training. So there were 4 modules on the CIARB course. Because of the time, you couldn't start the next module till you'd successfully completed the first. And because of the timing of that, basically meant almost a year for each module. And I only set out to have a good grasp of adjudication. I didn't set out to become an adjudicator. I was a party rep at the time, and I wanted to represent my parties properly and fully understand the process. So I joined module 1, succeeded with that, joined module 2, succeeded with that. And that for me was to be the end of it. So I had a 2-year break, and I realized I was missing the training. I really enjoyed it. So I decided to go back to it, and then I completed 3 and 4, and then decided to become an adjudicator. So by then it had taken me 6 years. And then it took me another 4 years to get onto the panel. I was lucky that the panel opened up coincidentally with me becoming ready to get onto the panel. that doesn't, I think I was lucky with that. So my 10 years could easily be much longer than that. And people need to understand that when they go into this. I think some people go on to one of the adjudication training courses in the belief that they'll get a diploma and then they will get onto the panel. That's not the case. It's that's the first cog in the wheel, if you like. So back to the question: Does the quality of training need to improve? I don't think so. I think the quality is very good. I think there's a tendency to hothouse people now, because I mean, Lena's going to add some words here, I think, about the current RICS course that she's on. And I think the actual training, the people delivering it is good. I think the content is good. But for me, it would be too quick because mine was slow and drawn out and over a 4-year period. I managed to really digest what I was learning, and I managed to put it into practice, and I managed to work with it. I think now it's almost a quick churn. I'm guessing at
So
that because I've not
yeah,
done the current course.
so if I add here, like, so I'm currently module 4 of the RICS diploma. I opted, as did a lot of my cohort, to do all 4 modules in 18 months. You can choose to separate them. The RICS does give you a discount if you pay for all 4 at the same time at the beginning. It is intense, I think. I don't know whether everyone who signed up realised just how full on it was going to be. So a good example would be module 1 is 6 months. There's over 180 hours of commitment in terms of reading and seminars, and that's just their kind of expected. That's how they estimated the hours. You are essentially doing a law degree, a 1 year of the law degree in 6 months whilst you do a full-time job. As a lawyer, I hadn't remembered everything. I got taught the postal rule again, which I probably will never use, but I completely forgotten what that bit was. So I think it is full on. The one thing that Bill's already touched on is it's online, and regrettably that has its pros and cons. Like, obviously, like, you can have more people online, you don't have to travel, and they record them, so if you can't attend, you do have a resource to use. But my preference would have been in person. I think you miss out on making those connections, building those relationships. And if you do something in person and you have Chatham House rules, you get so much more knowledge. Like,
Mm.
I personally will share some things with my cohort, but I won't share all my knowledge because I don't want it recorded and coming back to bite me at some stage. So I think it would be better if there was an option, but at the moment it's entirely online, and I think that's a lot of the providers are doing that.
Yeah, I think even if it was, let's call it hybrid, so the bulk of the course could be delivered as it now is online. But if there were certain sessions, so if there was 1 or 2 days that were face to face, I think that would be a big help as well. Even if it was a day and an evening. I mean, I
And
remember when on the 2-day sessions on the CIARB course, we were set homework in the evening. So you go back to your hotel and you'd work through the evening. It really was full on.
whilst not everyone on the course wants to be adjudicators, like, some people are there to enhance their experience because they want to be able to do more adjudication in-house, for example, if they're a contractor QS. There are a few people who want to be adjudicators, and something I have very much been told is a role of an adjudicator can be very lonely. And it's really helpful to make these connections now. I remember speaking at Arbrix a number of years ago, and they said, this is your forum, this is where you can talk, this is where you can ask for that kind of a bit of guidance, a bit of support. And actually, we're not making those relationships early. And I think later on, should any of us be fortunate enough to become adjudicators, it's almost a pity that, unlike those pre-COVID who may have, oh, actually, I remember you from my course, we won't necessarily have that strong connection because we didn't meet people in person.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. You've used the word loneliness there. I use the word isolation because it's more than just loneliness. It's you literally are sat in your own room and you have nobody to turn to because it has to be your decision. Um, it's the one biggest surprise that came to me. Maybe I was a bit naive going through the training before I became an adjudicator, but it did come as a surprise that you read through the paper, you read through things in the office before you're an adjudicator as a party rep, and you can discuss with people around, or you can pick the phone up. But once you're an adjudicator, you can't pick the phone up. You've got nobody to talk to. You only know what the parties say in their submissions. You can maybe read between the lines a little bit and try and join some dots up. And believe me, with some submissions you need to, but you really have to go off the submissions that are put in front of you. And that just leads you to asking lots of questions, but you can only ask the questions of the parties. And it is total isolation. And that is quite a big thing to come over, because, you know, even I was going to move on now to the smaller decisions that you make. Sometimes they can have a bigger impact on the people involved in it. So if you've got two warring small contractors with a dispute of £100,000, that could be the difference between life or death for one of those businesses. And that's a huge responsibility for you to have the total burden of, you know. So some people accept that and kind of relish that level of responsibility. But you, as a budding adjudicator, everybody needs to understand it is a heck of a responsibility.
I think also the other thing I was told is you need to have a thick skin, which we were definitely told on our diploma. I don't know whether, Bill, this was kind of, you were told this, but we have been told if you don't have a thick skin, it's probably not the right role for you, because it doesn't matter. You will always have one unhappy party. Usually you will have criticisms, and you never quite know where it's going to go. Obviously, your decision is usually temporary binding, depending on what rules you're under. And you may, I can speak from experience, we're off to the Supreme Court later this year for a dispute that started as an adjudication.
Yeah.
Obviously, like that's a very extreme example, but you need to know that you will be criticised, irrespective of whether your decision is perfect, because there will be an unhappy party.
Well,
yeah, we'll come on a little bit. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Annie. It's just to round that point up. It's an interesting business model, because 50% of your clients as an adjudicator will not like your decision, and they're the clients that have to pay for your services. So it's a challenge all round. So if you're not up for a challenge and you're not thick-skinned, reconsider whether it's something you want to get into.
We'll come on to the thick-skinned. We're going to talk about difficult parties and how you deal with them a little bit later in the session. But that point about being on your own is interesting, and I guess for most of us in this world, you've always worked in a team, and it's probably the first time, once you start being an adjudicator, it's the first time you've ever had to work without a team around you. That's quite an interesting one. So we've talked about the training, and you're both kind of quite clear that the training is good, you know, and it does the job, but even if we'd like it to be a little bit more in person. So then perhaps when it comes to people upset about the quality of some adjudicators, is it down to the panels? Are they doing enough, Bill, to vet the quality of adjudicators, or is it as easy to get your course and sign up and go?
Well, you've raised the issue of complaints and quality a couple of times here. I've got some notes which a colleague of mine, Peter Vinden, put together for another presentation. So apologies to Peter, I've kind of cribbed these off him. But he's going on and he's talking about how successful adjudication is. And from 1998, when the Act was enacted, to 2015, there were 7,500 adjudications, all by the RICS. And from 2015 to 2024, there were a further 12,000. So there's 20,000 adjudications in the first 26 years. And if you add then the other nominating bodies, of which we don't really have the data, I guess, but that would add another 3,000. So there's 23,000 adjudications, and less than 1% of those have had to go through the courts and been challenged. So I think there's a huge argument to say that adjudication is actually very successful. Also, I make the point, adjudication is not mandatory. It's a choice. You have a statutory right to go to adjudication, but you don't have to go to adjudication. Nobody's got your arm forced up the back. So if people complain about it and want to do something else, they can still go to litigation. So, you know, there is a choice element. I think I strayed from your question there a little bit. What was the question?
You know, you wonder if people who are most vocal about their dislike for it are those who've had decisions that have perhaps gone gone the way they wouldn't have liked them to. And you always see that with people are quick to complain about something they don't like, and
You
perhaps
always
not
hear
so
the loud,
vocal when they do.
yeah, you always hear the loudest voice.
Yeah.
So you will, I think, as Bill's illustrated by the fact there is so many that don't go to court. Yes, it doesn't necessarily mean they're happy with their decision. It might lead to without prejudice settlements and settlement agreements, all this kind of thing. But a majority of people just get on with it because they are completely aware that adjudication has its uses, quite frankly.
Yeah, well, it's a peremptory decision, which means it's temporarily binding. So if you don't like it and you still want your day in court, you can still have it. But I'll just give an instance here. There was a recent case, the Place First case, which most people will be familiar with. And the losing party didn't like the decision, and so they went to court, and the decision wasn't upheld. But the judge made it very plain that the submission that had been put in front of him was very different from the submission that was put in front of the adjudicator. So at first blush, people will read through that judgment and think the adjudicator was wrong, he was hopeless, he was all of that. He wasn't. He dealt with the representations or the submissions that were put in front of him. And the judge had a different set of documents to look at, and that's why he came up with a different outcome. So sometimes you might get, some people call them rogue decisions. I call them broad justice. I think it largely depends on the party's submissions. So if you haven't got the outcome you were looking for or believe is correct, maybe you should start looking at your submission first.
Interesting. So back to where we were, and the panels. So how do the panels decide on who gets to sit on a panel, and what's the process there once you've done your training to then becoming an adjudicator and getting those appointments?
Who's that question?
That's
You.
yeah for you.
Oh, is that for me?
Yeah, that's where we were.
Right. Okay. So the vetting of adjudicators. So I think it's different for different panels. But if I talk about the ICE, I'm not on the ICE panel, but of what I understand, they will accept certain exemptions from people who are on, say, the RICS or the CIR panel. I think you have to do a construction law course and exam for them to vet the quality of the legal side of things. And then I understand there's a decision writing test or exam. But the RICS process, so to get on the president's panel, first of all, you have to have the diploma or a qualifying diploma. So I had the CIR diploma and I'd sat all of the modules. That's when it was a 4-module process. You have to have 3 decisions that you've written, and you have to have 10 years experience post-qualification. So that's already creating an age profile. It's also setting a conundrum. How do you write 3 decisions? Because you can't write decisions, you can't get appointed until you're on a panel. So how do you get to do that? And there's various ways of doing that. There's ways around that. So you've got your 3 decisions, you've got your diploma, you've got your 10 years of relevant experience. There's then a fairly detailed application form, and I seem to think it was 8 or 10 pages long, which goes into minutiae of your background and what about yourself. You then have to have that signed or endorsed by 2 current president panelist members. If you get past that hurdle, you then given an assessment to complete, which is basically, I think there were 5 fairly detailed or complex questions on current issues in adjudication. And if you get past that, then you're invited to a familiarization day where they talk you through the whole process, from how to get appointed, what happens when you're appointed, how you respond to it, doing the conflict checks, doing all of that. And everybody in the room is observed. So there were 40 people in the room when I sat that day, and there were observers all around. So they're observing the interaction, the sort of questions you're asking, how you're behaving. And once you've got through all of that, then there is a 3-person panel interview, which quite frankly is brutal. They don't hold any punches, and you feel absolutely drained at the end of it. It's the toughest interview I've ever faced. So I think the vetting process is quite thorough. I'm not looking back on it. I don't see how that could really be changed or improved in any way. And I think, although the panel interview is brutal, I think it needs to be, because if you can't stand the test of that, then you really are going to struggle as an adjudicator. We're going back to the conversation we had before about, the clients, the losing clients, and what have you. And then ongoing, there's follow-up training, feedback, and there's complaints to deal with. If somebody makes a complaint about the adjudicator, the appointing body will follow it up. They will look into it. And then there's a regular review process. I think for the CIR, it's every 3 years you go through the panel interview, and for the RICS, it's every 5 years.
Yeah.
So that is the vetting
pretty robust and thorough. One of the other complaints about adjudication is and it's similar across the whole industry. It's not isolated to adjudication. Is diversity on the panels. I don't know the exact percentages off the top of my head. I probably should have put them up in front of this, but diversity in terms of gender and race and all the other markers. It does seem to be the same sort of people that sit on the panels. Lena, what can we be doing to improve diversity?
So for me, there are a few things, and this is where I have to say I'm cribbing myself now. So one of the big things that's come about in the last few years is the equal representation and adjudication pledge. They have come up with some ways that they think things can change, and it's everyone basically needs to play their part. It's not just the panels. Yes, obviously it's helpful if the panels can start increasing the numbers of people. That might be by changing how often they go out to the market to recruit, because every 5 years is quite large periods of time. You will cut out obviously younger people. Potentially that will then impact women and other races more. So obviously having the ability just to say, go to a panel and get a female adjudicator. I must say, I've never had a female adjudicator. I've only ever had males making decisions. And I would say majority of them have also been white males. So I still look forward to seeing this change. I do know more female adjudicators now. I know younger female adjudicators who've come up the ranks, who are starting to get onto some of the low value panels and some of the smaller panels, with the hope that they will obviously get onto the President's panel the next time that goes to the market. Also, we talk about nominating bodies. Obviously, the vast majority of adjudications nominations do go through the bodies, but you can name adjudicators. So when it's people are suggesting names, it's can we add a female? Can we add somebody of ethnic minority? Can we do this, that, and the other? Obviously, we've always got to put our clients' interest first. So that might be actually that we can't on this occasion do it, but if you at least think about it, there may be 1 or 2 occasions where you can add somebody's name. And then those who are already on the panels, I think the mentoring is very good. Like, people are incredibly supportive. It is a nice community to be part of. And it is them speaking out, encouraging people to go into it who wouldn't necessarily think it was for them. And that might be as simple as RICS every now and again doing a seminar explaining the process, what it involves, how do you get there. A bit more transparency probably would be helpful.
Yeah, I think those are all right. I think it also doesn't help that, particularly RICS figures show that women tend to leave the surveying profession on average about 15 years earlier than men. So again, if you're looking for experienced professionals who've had their long career and have got that experience and at the stage that they can take the adjudicator training, they're already looking to get out, or they've already got out of the industry. So those issues don't help, and those are wider construction industry issues that we have to look at. So moving on a little bit from how you become an adjudicator and how the panels work to looking at adjudication as a whole. This year, or last year's King's adjudication report recorded referrals are at an all-time high. So we've never had more adjudications. There's a whole industry that has spanned around adjudication, businesses that are built on providing services to adjudication. Does this mean that the original intentions, Lena, of adjudication have moved from being this fast-paced process that is designed to keep money moving throughout the industry to almost an industry in itself that sort of it funds itself, it fuels itself, it keeps itself going?
Very much so. I am very aware that some adjudicators would love lawyers to get out of the picture and it just to be back to keeping it simple, mainly money disputes. And obviously, in other jurisdictions, you do have those limitations. If I remember rightly, Ireland, you can only refer payment disputes to adjudication because they are obviously, adjudication is very new, they're concentrating on the money moving. We in the over 20 years that we've now had adjudication, obviously have moved very quickly and we now encompass a lot more disputes. It does mean that, quite frankly, the original intention's gone. It's not, you can't do it quickly. You are now looking at typically longer adjudications. They're much more expensive, obviously, than what you people were probably originally involved thought. We've got experts involved, you have lawyers. It's still helpful though. Like, adjudication has evolved because there is a need there for a dispute resolution model that isn't arbitration and isn't the courts. I think probably a good example, I think most people know it, is BDW and Ardmore, because obviously that one's, we've had the decision recently and we found out earlier this month that they've got permission from the Court of Appeal to take it further. They did the referral on the 27th of March and the decision was on the 17th of September. So that's 174 days. It's obviously, I think I worked out about 6 times longer than the 28-day period. It's multi-million-pound claims. And obviously that also involved DPA claims, which is the part that's now going to the Court of Appeal for ultimate decision making. I think that's a prime example of how we've gone from a smash and grab, you didn't serve you a valid pay less notice, onto quite complicated matters. But the parties thought that was the right arena. Well, at least one of them did.
Yeah. And Bill, that brings us on to our next question, which is, is a 28-day process suitable for the types of large, complex, lots of money disputes that we're seeing, or does the actual process need tweaking, or is that up to the parties themselves, as Lena says?
So several questions there. I think it's rare that a 28-day process is suitable for some of the complex disputes, certainly what Lena's talking about there. But it is open to the parties to agree a suitable timetable. And I think the adjudicator needs to be quite firm on this, because an adjudicator basically has a contract with the parties to make a decision within 28 days of receiving their referral. And if he doesn't do that, he isn't entitled to his payment. So the adjudicator is going to reach a decision within the 28 days. Now, if you're referring a very complex dispute, you are opening yourself up to broad justice. So why would you do that? So I think it is, there has been talk of having different forms of adjudication. And I do think that, because a point that Lena made there, that one of the parties might want to extend the adjudication, but the other party might not. They might be quite happy with broad justice, because actually that's probably their best position in those circumstances. In which case you would be stuck to, generally the referring party has the power to grant an extra 14 days without reference to the responding party. So the adjudicator is now stuck with a 42-day period, which might not be adequate. Now, I would hope that an adjudicator would be strong enough to say to the parties, look, this dispute is bigger than I was led to believe. It can't be dealt with in 28 days. We need to come up with a realistic period. And if you don't, I'm going to resign. And that's the only way that they're going to extend it. And that option is always there. But of course, there's nothing then to stop the referring party. They haven't had a decision, so they can go back to adjudication, just keep starting the process again. So I think on reflection of all of that, I think the control is with the parties if the adjudicator is strong enough. Haven't helped the adjudicator that jumps into an adjudication that is far too big and far too complex and is prepared to do it within the 28 days and then come up with, well, what could only be broad justice, which might not be suitable. And perhaps there is mileage in developing this conversation of having 2 or 3 different bands of adjudication. So for more complex dispute, but how you would then categorize them, I don't know. It's a whole subject and we've run out of time.
Also, quite a lot of people probably go, oh, well, more money might mean more complicated, but that's not true because you can have a smash and grab that's multi-million pounds, whereas you might have a very complex defect case, which actually isn't vastly expensive.
Absolutely.
It goes on. And yeah, we are coming up to time. There's a couple of questions in the chat. I just want to quickly throw at you. Lena, there's one for you which says someone's asked, you said you can name your adjudicator. What's the process look like if you're requesting an adjudicator directly, and what are the factors to consider when appointing them?
So when you're setting up your contract, rather than having a nominating body, you can name one, few. You can have certain rules. So you might say that you have to have a QS with 10 years experience for a quantum dispute. Rather than naming someone, then you try and agree before you ultimately, if you can't agree, you go to a nominating body. It all depends on your drafting. In terms of what you need to think about is there are disadvantages to naming one adjudicator because you never quite know what disputes are going to happen. I do know a story from a few years ago where they had a very long running contract, and unfortunately their adjudicator was no longer available by the time they came to a dispute. So that was obviously for one life-ending reason, kind of. But you're on the other end, you might have someone that they're then really busy. So it's all about having backups and thinking carefully about what might happen in the future. You kind of have to crystal ball a little bit.
And another comment we've had in the chat is that mediation is a good starting point for a quicker decision. Would you agree with that? Do either of you have any comments on mediation versus adjudication?
It doesn't work all the time. It can work. You can have very happy parties in mediation because they come together, they kind of work through solutions. But if they want their day in court, adjudication can satisfy that. It doesn't all the time. I think also sometimes they can't make the decision and actually they just need an adjudication decision just to keep them going.
Yeah, I just qualified as a mediator, so I'm a big fan. I also know a very experienced adjudicator who maybe the person who's asked this question actually, he quite often turns adjudications into mediations with the agreement of the parties, where he believes they're not actually a million miles apart, and sitting around the table and discussing in a focused way can get to a quicker and more equitable end result, because there is no doubt that if you can mediate a settlement that's acceptable to both parties, they can carry on working. And that's quite often the situation between contractor and subcontractor. Whereas once you've gone through litigation or even adjudication, chances are those parties aren't going to work together again. So there is a longevity of your business model to think about as well. And mediation can help with that. But I agree with Lena, if the two parties are miles apart and warring, mediation's probably not going to be the solution.
Yeah, we've almost out of time. We're pretty much over a couple of minutes. There's just one more final question that we have that I wanted to ask you before we hit off. 28 days, large numbers of submissions, people are, need, the pressure of the environment of adjudication. It could be make or break for a business, as you mentioned, Bill, particularly in those smaller ones. How do you manage difficult parties under that high pressure? What do you need to be doing as adjudicator to keep people in check?
Well, you need to stay firm. You need to stick to the timetable. You can't limit the parties. One of the obligations of the adjudicator is to provide natural justice. So that's providing a fair hearing. However, you just have to, I've had situations where that we've set a timetable and we've limited the submissions, and then a party's sent through another submission. What do I do with it? I don't feel that I can ignore it completely just because it's just come out of the blue, because that wouldn't be fair to them. But I might not attach as much weight to it, and I would make that very clear in the decision-making process. But come what may, if I'm tied down to a 28-day period, I want my invoice paying. So I'm going to make sure that I issue an enforceable decision, and it will be issued within the 28-day period.
Elena, from your perspective on the other side, as a party
being
rep,
the difficult party, yeah,
being the difficult party or dealing with a difficult party on the other side, how do you manage that? What?
I think when you're party reps, the one of the biggest battles is the timetable, and I'm seeing more so now, especially over the last few months, attempts by party reps to try and agree the timetable themselves and then present it to the adjudicator. Obviously, you do have some referring parties who insist 28 days is absolutely appropriate when you know that they've spent 6 months prepping for it. So sometimes you just have to go, well, we're not going to be in agreement. Let's just present our cases to the adjudication and ask them to make a decision. But I think a lot of it is you just have to remember that this is our jobs and it's not personal. So you can get wound up by other party reps, and you just have to take that away and just go, woof, another day.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining us. I think it's been an interesting discussion. I think it seems that, the process of becoming an adjudicator and the way the panels work is robust, and perhaps it's just the nature of disputes and the evolving nature of construction and how complex it is that perhaps makes it a little bit trickier. Big thank you to Bill and Lena for joining us this morning. Really appreciating it. And thank you to everyone who's joined us online. We will be back again next month. Stuart will be back hosting the next episode. As always, that'll be up on the website very soon. This will be up on YouTube. In the usual places, you'll be able to keep up to date with the episodes. And thank you all for joining us, and see you next time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Lena. Take care. Bye-bye.